Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. In this video, I'm talking more about watercolor paints. I'm showing you the 3 different kinds of watercolor paints that I like to use here in my studio. There are more watercolor forms out there on the market. There's watercolor markers that you can use and even watercolor pencils, and I'll review those later in another video. I want to tell you that by no means I am an expert in these things. I'm largely a self-taught artist, so bear with me, but I want to show you that you don't have to be a professional artist to feel like you can pick up these tools and give it a try at home. So in this video, we're talking about pan watercolors. We're going to be talking a little bit about 2 watercolors, and lastly, we're going to get to my favorite, which is watercolor inks. Alright, before we get started, this video is not sponsored. I haven't been given any of these materials, and this is 100% my own opinion. Alright, so I'm going to start off by showing you my pan watercolors. Over here I have this travel size kit from Koi. I bought it on Amazon maybe about 10 years ago. You can see I haven't really used it all that much because nothing is really too depleted. It comes with 24 colors. And this little water brush, I already have it pre-filled with water, but you just put it together like that, and it has water on the inside. It has this removable palette that when you're out painting, you just stick it over here and you have extra room for mixing your colors. And then over here on either side you have these removable sponges, which are great for dabbing and cleaning your brushes in between your colors. All in all, this kit costs about $26 on Amazon. I think it's a really great little travel companion. It's a great low investment for starting out for beginners, or if you're in tight quarters and you don't really have a lot of room for setting up or keeping your supplies in between using them. It's one of my favorite things about it is that it's very economic in that you're not going to overmix your paint and create more than what you're willing to use at a particular time. So you don't have a lot of wastage, which is one of the problems of the tube watercolors that we're going to get to in a second. Alright, so to get started, let me show you how to use these. I'm going to move the palette off to the side. I've already put together my brush. I filled it up with some water. You just dip it onto one of the colors. You give the brush a little bit of squeeze, and water comes out through the brush. You load it up on your color. If you want to create more, you come over here and you squeeze the brush and transfer the paint over to the palette. This will let you build up larger amounts for painting larger areas, or if you want to start mixing or diluting your colors, you're going to want to do that over here on the palette as well. And then I come back over to my paper. I like to start by loading up a bunch of water onto my paper first. I mean, it is watercolor painting. That's a lot of the fun of it for me. You start laying down your color, and you can come back over here, start adding. Alright, so I have water off to the side. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to show you what you would do if you're out there on the go. This travel kit is great for being on the go. I've brought it onto planes before. It's kind of that annoying person sitting on the plane watercolor painting next to you. But it is good for that. I'm going to come over here and create another circle. Let's add a new color in there. It's got some of the green. So one of the other great things about this kit is that you have all 24 colors at your disposal at all times, unlike some of the other methods that we're going to get to where you have to pull each color out one at a time. It's part of the setup. Here you have access to all the colors and more that you can mix. Alright, and if you have too much water on the page, get a little paper towel, dab it, soak it up. You can always add more water through the brush. You can get the brush nice and clean in between those colors. So pan colors are a pigment-based system, unlike the watercolor inks, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which are a dye-based system. This is a little exercise that you can try at home. Don't have to put a lot of thought into it. Don't have to be a perfect illustrator or really know much about art or color. Just kind of play around. It's very soothing and therapeutic. All right, so here's a close-up of what that looks like with the 24 colors. As far as the cons are concerned with this kind of thing, with pan watercolors, I'd say it's a little bit harder to do large-scale paintings because you have to use the palette and mix the amount of color that you need off to the side. So this one's a little bit more suited for smaller scale paintings or if you're on the go. The other comment that I would give is that even though the colors are beautiful and they're very true to life, they just don't have that same wow factor that I've found in the watercolor inks. And I'm going to show you those soon. All right, next we are talking about tube watercolors. Here is a set that I have. It's about 24 colors. The brand is Reeves. I can't remember exactly where I got it or how much I paid for it, but I'm pretty sure it's on the lower end of the price spectrum. I'll link below in something comparable. In fact, I'll link below on everything that I'm talking about here so that you can see the prices and the value and just maybe want to explore a little bit more with these paints at home. So for these, the investment is a little bit higher. Like I said, they're a little bit more expensive than the pan watercolors. But what's great about them is that they can last a really long time if you take care of them. So some of the ways that you want to take care of them best is making sure that you clean off. I mean, you could do it a little bit better than what I have shown you here. But making sure that the edges of the screw top are clean before you put it back on. And then making sure that you close it really tightly because you don't want air getting in there and having your paints dry out inside of the tube. That really defeats the point of having the paint. So for these, you're going to need a few extra bits and bobs. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't come with its own brush and it doesn't come with its own palette as we showed you with the travel case earlier. I have several different kinds of palettes here. I bought a stack of these. I mean, it was maybe like 12 of them in the container. So I have a whole bunch of these little 6-packs. I've had this over the years, which I really like because it has a lid, and if you're, saving some for later, that will make your paint last even longer so they won't dry out so quickly. But this might be, if you're going to be doing a lot of painting, this might be the right palette for you to invest in. I've cleaned it out, but clearly haven't cleaned it out quite perfectly. I have some old gouache colors that are holding on strong here. But this is great because you can mix a lot more colors, and then once it dries out, all you need to do to bring the paint back to life is just add a bit of water, and it almost turns into a pan watercolor situation after it's left the tube. All right, so to get started here, pick up your palette, open it up, get one of your tubes, squeeze some out. I like to do it at the top if you have an angled well. That way you can add the water, which drips down to the bottom, and you can control the amount of paint within there. That way you can get more diluted and lighten up your paint, and you can always dip your brush back in up at the top, and you'll see what I mean here. So I'm going to just keep my little circle going. One note that I have not shown you here, but I'll tell you, is that you may want to have 2 different brush sets when you're working with tube watercolors, and you can do your mixing with one brush and then you can do your painting with another brush. That way you can keep your water clean. You can do it with one brush, but you're going to go through more water and you're going to go through more paper towels cleaning it up in between each mixing. Alright, so I've got a little bit down. So honestly, these are the kinds of watercolors I have used the least, and I'll tell you why. They don't quite have the same on-the-go convenience that the pan set has earlier, partly because my pan set is a travel case, and it's just really convenient. This requires a bit more setup, a bit more washing, a bit more brushing, washing your brushes afterwards, and containing everything when you're done. And if I have to be critical, I'd say you're still not getting the same amount of brilliant color that I'm going to show you later with the inks. But what I will say to the defense of tube watercolors is that you get a level of complexity and depth within the pigments themselves that I've just not found with pan watercolors or with inks. The highs and the lows are a little bit deeper, and this really shows up especially when you're using the darker colors. So if you really want a range of levels in your color, you may want to experiment more with tube watercolors. All right, so as I'm showing you the richness and depth, I'm going to get out my darkest color, which is a black. I'm going to use one brush and I'm going to mix some water in and start to get a more liquid consistency to mix my color up. I'm going to attempt to get a really light, watery version on the page so that I can show you the highs and lows. All right, so I can get it pretty light there if you water it down. And as I go here, all right, so the reason that you're able to get so much more depth, in my opinion, with the pan than you can with the pan watercolors is you just get so much more pigment loaded up onto the paintbrush than you can when you just slowly brush it with the water when you have a pan. You can really get, it's almost like working with acrylics at that point, except it's going to have a different effect, a much more transparent effect even on the page when it's down. Now, the biggest downside that I have found with using these kinds of watercolors is that you do end up wasting a little bit. It's good to have a palette that you can let it dry out, close it up, use it again in the future, but you really only want to pour as much out of the tube that you're willing to use at that time. It's really hard to gauge that sometimes. So with it being a little bit more expensive and then sometimes wasting a little paint, taking a little bit more setup, that's probably why I haven't used it that much, but clearly there's a lot more room for me to explore this medium and get to know it a little bit better. Mix these colors together a little bit. All right, so the last kind of watercolor that I want to talk to you about is my favorite, and that's the Watercolor Inks. The brand that I have been buying for years is Dr. P.H. Martin's Radiant Concentrated Watercolors. So I fell in love with these years ago shopping at my local art store, Dick Blick, shout out to California. So I first bought these one color at a time. I was at my local art store and I bought 2 colors and I brought them home. They were a bit of a splurge for me. They were about $8 at the art store then. They still are. That's what they sell them on the manufacturer's website, $8 a bottle. I brought it home. They just performed differently. I fell in love with it, and ever since then I've been buying them in sets on Amazon. You can get them in a set. They come like this, 14 colors. So that brings the price of each bottle down to about $5.50 instead of the $8. Definitely still a financial investment, but if you take care of them, even using them a lot, they've lasted me years, so you really get your money's worth out of them. So as it says in the name right here on the bottle, these are radiant and concentrated, and that's really what got me into them, working with them in the first place, is that you can just achieve a level of brightness and brilliance that I just haven't found in the pan watercolors and the tube watercolors that I bought. I'm sure they're out there. If I explore different shops, you can get glitter, you can get metallic, but I just really love the level of brightness and pop that you get out of using the radiant concentrated watercolors. Though the way that I like to use them, you have to shake them up first because all the sediment will settle down at the bottom, and I like to put a couple drops of each color, 2 to 3 drops, in 2 different wells. And I go through, I've picked out my palette, and I start adding drops, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add water to one side so that I get a diluted green and then I get a concentrated green, and I get a diluted pink, and I get a concentrated pink. And this is really like doubling the number of colors that you picked out. You can really control the level and opacity that you get out of each color. And it just gives you more variation to play with. It's really what the water is all about, and it's one of my favorite things about using this type of watercolor. So on this side, I need to get one of those cute little eyedroppers, that pipette that I can just add water to, but you just load up your brush, try not to splash it too much. Another thing about getting to know these inks is sometimes the color looks different on paper than it does on the bottle. So this color is golden brown, looks pretty dark on the bottle. I mean, if you see it here, it looks like a really dark brown. But on the diluted side, if I add it to my page, I'm going to start with a layer of really light water, and then I'm going to go to my diluted side, and you start adding it, and it's quite a bright, almost acid color yellow. And you see how bright it is. You wouldn't think a bottle of dark brown is going to give you a bright golden, mustardy, spicy yellow. And then if I go, I'm going to dry off my brush, pick up some of the concentrated, and I can get that brown. And then play around on the page. So here I like to have a couple different cups of water, especially when I'm working with the concentrated inks. I'll usually do a warm, maybe a cool. If I'm doing purple, it'll get its own water, or if I'm doing browns and neutral tones, and you want to keep that, you may want to have a separate cup. Otherwise, you're going to be running to the sink a lot more and cleaning out your brush. You can also I'll show you what the concentrated color looks like if you lay that down instead of just a base layer of water. But you can see how bright these tones are. I want to clean off my brush and come over here. And then on top of using it in the palette, now I haven't used this yet, it's not the bright pink that I put in my pan, but you can drop it directly from the bottle and get some really vivid, bright colors. The biggest downside that I found to the radiant concentrated inks is that unlike the first two watercolor methods that I talked about at the beginning of this is a dye-based system and not a pigment-based paint system. What that means is that's what allows you to get that bright, brilliant color that attracts you in. That's why I bought them. However, dye-based inks are not color fast. And what that means is that over time, when exposed to sunlight, your painting, your ink colors, they're going to fade over time. They're going to shift. So that's definitely something to consider if you're creating archival quality paintings that you're selling. But if you're just creating assets, you're generating paintings for work, maybe you do this for fun, these might be an option for you if they're not cost prohibitive. A couple ways around that is if you're a student or a freelancer and you're just storing these in books, they're not going to be exposed to sunlight, so that might not be a problem. Otherwise, you can get a higher quality frame with a UV coating on the glass. Make sure you protect your investment if you're buying a painting and keeping it for showing everybody in your home. Now, for anyone who likes the look and feel of the watercolor inks but wants their paintings to be light fast, Dr. P.H. Martin's does make a line of pigment-based watercolor inks. They're called Hydrus Fine Art Watercolors. I don't happen to have any today to show you. They're definitely on my list. I'd love to get a hold of them. If you're used to using them and you know how they differ from the Radiant Concentrated, drop a line below. I'd love to hear from you and see what you think about those. And if Dr. P.H. Martin's wants to reach out to me and gift me a set of their gorgeous pigment-based watercolor inks, that would be awesome. You know where to get a hold of me. But that's basically it for today. So I hope you've learned something new about watercolor inks. Maybe you want to try something out for yourself at home. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. And here is where I thank my amazing Patreon subscribers. Behold their beautiful names, for their support helps me in my quest to do more of what I love, helping me bring videos like this to you. So if you like what you see and you've made it all the way to the end of the video, then head over to Patreon and check it out. There you'll find access to cool perks like full-length videos and my Card of the Month Club, which you don't want to miss. But really, any support is a meaningful gesture and will get you your name thrown up at the end of every video like this. So definitely a link in the description. Go check that out. Thanks, and see you next time. Bye!